Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to make this lattice fold card, and it's such a fun and easy design, and it's pretty on the inside and on the outside. It's a very simple technique, and you could probably do it with supplies you already have around the house. This video is brought to you by Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find the stamps and inks I'm using at pegstamps.com, and don't forget to use the coupon code in the video description to save 10% off your order. So without further ado, let's get our supplies together and make the card base. What I have here is a piece of cardstock. It's half a sheet. It is 4 1/4 by, 5 1/2 by 8 1/2, so it's going to make a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card. And what we're going to do, we're also going to need a 45-degree angle triangle, a pair of scissors, a pencil, and a scoring board, and an eraser. So I'm going to start off by scoring this in half. That's 4 1/4 inches for our standard half a sheet of cardstock card. I'm using heavyweight cardstock, so I really want to make sure I score it well. I'm going to flip it over and score it again right on that same line because we're going to be folding this, and I want to make sure that I'm going to get a really crisp fold here, okay? So I am going to just crease that down with my bone folder. Now I'm going to put the I'm going to put this up along the guide that has the measurements. And if you don't have a scoring folder, that's alright, just use a ruler. I'm going to make a mark at every 1/4 inch all the way across. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is turn this on its side so I have that right butted up against the corner. And then I'm going to use this angle tool, this little 45-degree angle, and I am going to draw a line. But first I need to make a guideline. So I'm going to make a line going down here at 1 inch. And I'm just going to do that with my pencil here. And you just got to make sure that when you're doing this, you can't get my thing to go the right way. You got to make sure that you've got the you get that pushed up in the corner so you have nice straight lines. So you're going to be making lines from each of the little tick marks that you made, and what you're going for is an even number of little lines here, so our lattice pattern will work out. Now if it so happens that maybe you miscounted or mismeasured and you end up with an odd number, then you can trim your card a little bit short, and I'll show you that in a minute. So now I have my lines drawn all the way across the spine. What we're going to do is cut out our little, we're going to cut on the slits. So what I'm going to do first is cut down to that first mark right there, and then I'm going to cut in from that corner. Now ultimately you could also put those marks on the side of your scoring board if you wanted to do that. It would probably save you a little time, especially if you love these cards and you end up making a bunch. And then you're going to cut down on each of these slits right up until you get to that that guideline that you put down at 1 inch. So we're making a row of just parallel slits on the spine of this folded card. Then when you get to the end, you just snip off that little corner, and you want to erase your marks. So if you saw that like maybe your measuring wasn't that great and you see that maybe you have a skinny edge, you can kind of adjust as you go and make it a little bit wider. Okay, so then what you want to do is open it up, okay, and look what you have. You have this, it almost looks like, I don't know what you want to call it, like one of those paper lanterns we used to make at like in grade school. And you're going to open that up, and you might want to, I'm just seeing if this side is a little prettier on the outside, so I'm actually going to, it doesn't really matter because you can fold it either way. I am going to grab the second from the bottom, okay, and I'm going to fold it down. Just like that. Then you're going to skip one, grab the next one, and fold it down. Grab the next one, fold it down, and so on and so forth until you have filled up this design. And you can experiment with how wide you want your lattice to go on the spine. You could have it, I like to do 1 inch, but if you wanted to do it, like if you're using skinnier slits, you can go smaller. You can have a narrower line. I'll show you one that I just kind of eyeballed that had a little bit wider edges, and I made that a little bit thicker because of that. Now if I wanted to trim a little bit off the top, I can. But let me just show it to you, fold it up. We get this beautiful lattice design on the edge. This would be an, you can either trim that a little bit shorter. I'll probably trim that so it's the same height as that. You could wrap a little ribbon around it. It's up to you. So on this one, I did the same thing, except I had an odd number, so I ended up with a gap there. So that's not great. I'd want to probably just trim it right off, like maybe there, because that looks kind of funny. But it gives you a bigger design. So it just depends on what you like. Okay. So just remember to keep it to an even number so that you'll have the correct amount of little V's to fold. So I'm just going to trim about 1/4 of an inch off the top, and we'll go on to the next part of our card. Okay, so of course when I start a card, I've mentioned so many times that I like to make an envelope first. And the reason I like to do that is because I can use a leftover paper to embellish my card, and I can also pick my color palette from my paper, because it's so much easier to color something to match your paper than it is to color something and then try to find paper to match. If you've ever done that before, you know what I'm talking about. So making that envelope gave me 2 pieces of paper left over, and I thought this one would be nice to kind of do as my layering. But I want to, I really love the look of kind of a tattered vintage edge, so I'd really like to tear it. So what I'm going to do here is use my little clear triangle, but you could use a ruler, it doesn't have to be a triangle at all, to get myself a little torn edge. Now this is going to be super subtle because this is, it tears really well against this, this ruler. But the nice thing about this is I can get a pretty small, like, because I don't have a huge scrap left over, I'm able to get a pretty small torn area. So I'm just going to see what else I need to tear. See, I mean, you could tear that a little bit rougher too and it would look really pretty. If I line the bottom of this up, you know what, maybe I'll make a bigger border. I think I would rather have a bigger border. So if I tear these 2 edges off, I'm going to have, it's going to be square because I'm going to be tearing it against a square. This is just a Statler triangle. You can get it at any office supply store if you don't have one, you know, in your desk. And when I put this on my card, I'm going to want my darker color down just because that's going to give me a better, I'm kind of going to weight the card a little bit better. So this is just some inexpensive paper too. It's very thin, so it tears really easily. So if you have some of that older scrapbook paper that maybe you're like, oh, I wish I bought thicker paper, I don't like working with this thinner stuff, that's great for envelopes and for these layers because it's not going to add a lot of bulk to your card. I'm going to be doing my stamping on this panel here, and I'm just kind of figuring out where I want it because I have this area up here that you're left with after you do your lattice fold. You're left with kind of that gap. So I thought, boy, that'd be a really great place to put some ribbon. And this is some seam binding I dyed a few projects ago. I don't know if you remember that video, but I showed you how to dye seam binding. And this is just the white Hug Snug seam binding. You can get it in, I usually like this, I actually would have preferred this thicker one, but I didn't have quite enough of that dyed to wrap around. But it comes in 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch widths, and it's like a roll of 100 yards for like $10. So it's really, really affordable.
A quick tip when you're tying a bow is to turn your card upside down and tie it that way. I ended up layering up the fat and the thin ribbons, and I just tied the fat ribbon in one knot and the skinny ribbon in a bow, and I thought that looked really nice, and that way I was able to make use of that scrap. And I can kind of see how it's going to lay out with my stamping panel, and now we're ready to stamp.
Now I'm going to stamp my focal image, and what I'm doing here is I want to use this urn, but I don't want the sunshine on it. I want it to be a little bit more classical looking, so I'm going to use a memento marker because I know that I want to color this with my alcohol pens, and I know that memento is kind of invisible when it comes to alcohol pens. That doesn't bother them. I also want to stamp a bunch of like foliage and flowers in the urn, so I want to make sure I have an open area in which I can stamp. So what I'm going to do is selectively ink up the lines that I want to print. So I'm going here with this marker, I'm getting some of the shading dots, a stippling there. I am going up almost to the top of the urn, and maybe I'll just get a little bit of the top of the urn just so I can have some kind of peeking through. But generally I just want to, I want to have more of a classic urn, and I want to have spaces where I can stamp my flowers so it looks like they're in the urn and kind of spilling over the edge, and I don't see that, you know, dark line on the top, and I also don't see the sun. So now that I've colored this with my marker, I'm going to breathe on it to moisten the ink, and then I'm going to stamp it down towards the bottom of my little panel here. And there we go. So now I have the urn, but instead of it having the sun in the middle and the closed top, I've left spaces to do my stamping. So for stamps, I'm going to be using some stamps from the Brambly Rose set. I'm going to use this bigger branch from Bittersweet. So those are stamps I've had forever, those sets. I'm going to use the stamps from Delicate Rose, and also I'm going to use the leaves from Celery Rose. So the great thing about the stamps is that as you collect them, they become more versatile because you have more things that you can stamp. So at first I wasn't sure if I wanted these big ones on there from Brambly Rose. They look kind of big, but they're also going to take up some space. So I think what I'll do is stamp them, but I'll use the lightest color possible that I have, and maybe just put a couple in there, and they're just going to be kind of filler. So I can overlap them, and it's not really going to matter too much. So now I think I'll use Love Letter and stamp a few of the smaller ones. Move one up there. Maybe one hanging down there. I want to get a couple of these big branches of foliage here. And you can go right off the edge, which is nice, especially with these bigger ones, because it can be hard to cram them in. I think I'll go... Remember, there's a little line on the edge of your stamp. It kind of tells you where the stem's coming out of. It tells you where the bottom of the design is. So I can throw a couple of those in. I think I'm going to put a couple of these coming down because I left a little bit of space so that I could kind of nestle some things in. I want to get that little cluster of smaller roses, a few here and there. And I think I might do them in the lighter pink as well. But I'm going to have to mix them a little bit, so let me stamp off my extra red. I'm going to do the yellow, the lighter pink, then I'm just going to kind of shade it in that red. So it's going to give me a lighter, just overall color. And maybe just one more in the two-tone there. And there's a smaller little piece of foliage flower here that came with that set, because obviously they're smaller, that have a tinier leaf, so I'm going to sneak those in a few places. So I'm going to end up with this nice full arrangement. And the reason I'm stamping this first is because I'm not sure where I'm going to have the you know, where I'm going to want to color on the base of this. So I pulled this teal because I thought it was a really nice accent with that paper, and I want to do something with it. I'm going to try a couple of these branches in the teal. Just maybe kind of going off here and there. I know it's kind of weird, but sometimes, you know, you get those decorative colors. And maybe I'll do this little sprig in brown. I probably should have done this in teal and the other one in brown now that I think about it, because I'm thinking of like your little eucalyptus sprigs. That would have been good. But we'll just build the design this way, and I think it's going to be fine. Okay, so there is my stamping there. I think that I want to add a little bit of some background color. I put the wrong cap on that. And I think I'll probably use Summer Sky because there's that pretty light blue. And I also will use some bamboo leaves here on the bottom. I did smudge. I somehow managed to smudge the bottom of that, but that's no big deal. I'm going to grab my blending brushes and put a little background in. I'm going to start with the bamboo leaves. I'm actually going to ink a little bit directly on the card because of that red smudge. I could actually stamp a flower on the ground, like maybe it fell out of the arrangement. So that's something I can do if I need to. I'm going to try to minimize that. Now I find that if I use these big brushes, if I squeeze them, I can get a little more control, especially if I'm trying to get around something. And I haven't colored yet, so I know I can add a little bit of coloring on the ground as well, and it's not going to bother anything. It's not going to bother that ink because I'm going to use my alcohol pens. And then I'm going to grab blue. I'm going to try this Summer Sky and see if that's bold enough. If not, I'm going to go in with a teal Zeal. And you can get these inks from our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. They have them in stock all the time in the mini pads like I'm using here. I like to have a big pad of the black and the cocoa, just because I use them so much for like stamping outlines. But as far as like the other colors go, I really like these smaller pads because I can have a bunch out on my table at once when I am doing projects like this. So now what I'm going to do is zoom in, and we're going to do our alcohol ink coloring, and I'm going to push all of this stuff out of the way so we can focus in on that. Okay, so I'm just going to show you really quick what colors I have here. First, on the grass, I'm going to use some YG7 and BG3. That's YG7, that's BG3. You can use whatever markers you have. You know, so we got this kind of light yellowy green and kind of, yeah, light yellowy green, light olivey color, and you got this kind of dark olivey color. And what I'm going to do, and this is on Nina cardstock I'm working because I knew I was going to do some marker coloring. I'm just going to go in with a darker color, add just kind of like a little bit of like a shadow under here because I would want more color right up against the vase. It's going to help it pop against the background. And I'm just kind of stippling as you go away because you want some like kind of texture on the grass. And then I'm just going to kind of blend it out here. It's not going to pay any attention to the memento that I have there. So I can just kind of bring that color out. It's got a little texture. Really not going to fuss about it too much. I could go in with some blades of grass if I wanted to. It's up to you. And I usually don't get too detailed at this point. I would wait till after I've gotten some more stuff before I went in and did any more, but that's already added a shadow underneath and given it a little bit more depth. So I think I might actually put some patina on this, but I can wait. Let's do for grays. I don't have very many grays in this set, so I've got a neutral gray 2, a neutral gray 5, a cool gray 7, and a cool gray 9. So light, 2 mediums, and a dark. I think that'll be all right. I'm going to color the whole thing with the neutral gray 2 first, and that's going to lay down a base, and it's actually going to make everything else kind of you know, easy to blend and match because I'm going to have that base down there. So markers are transparent, so they're going to show through. So this color will influence all the colors I put on top. And you know, you could be following along if you have Copics, if you have Prismacolors. Just look at your grays, get like, you know, get 3 or 4 colors and just follow along. So after I got that base one in, I am going to go in with my darkest one, and I'm going to put this where I think I'd have the darkest shadow. Not too much here. A little bit under there, and I do like to get a little bit on the sides because that does make it feel like a little bit more round. And I'm working quickly because I want those colors to blend. So now I'm going to go with the next color. It's lighter from that darker one. I'm going to just quickly go in with that chisel tip. Pull it out a little bit. Just kind of feathering it in. I know you can feather in with a brush tip quite a bit, but I don't want to put too much ink down. I feel like I put a little bit less ink down when I use the chisel. That's the only reason for that. And then with this, the medium kind of tone, I am going to feather in with the brush tip. Just kind of pull it in like that. If I want a smooth blend, I can go back in with my lightest gray, and I can just kind of merge them together a little bit. Just depends on how extreme of a look you want. Now if I want some patina on this, I can go in with this light light color, and I can just kind of dab, and it's gonna push away the pigment. And this is like kind of a light minty color. So I could actually do this with a clear, and it will probably be a little bit more what's the word, just kind of more dramatic. You can see how it's kind of making the ink break apart, and you're getting that little bit of texture. And now I can go in with some of this kind of seafoamy color And because I have so much of that clear underneath, it's not getting too dark, and I'm just kind of dabbing some of that on there. All right, and that's what we have so far. So I'm going to let that dry, and I'm actually going to grab a couple colored pencils and add a little bit more of a frosty patina to it. So hang on one second for that. I actually had these pastel pencils right on my table, so I'm like, yeah, why didn't I use these? This will work just fine. So I'm just going to use the edge of them and just kind of scribble in some of this kind of frosty texture. And then I can go in and put some of these green patina on there too, because these are very opaque. They're going to show up right on top. This brand that I'm using has been discontinued for quite a long time. This is a Van Gogh brand. You can use whatever one you want. Generals, Kimberly, Derwent. It doesn't really matter, but I think it adds a nice texture. You can even get a little bit of a kind of a brown rusty color in there too, which I think would look kind of pretty. So, and because it's got that kind of rusty color, it would really show up against the green. But you don't have to. I mean, this is totally, that's totally up to you. The rust will make it look a little bit more galvanized than cementy, so it's completely up to you. I think I'm going to try some of this bluish gray as well, because I took away so much of the dark when I went in dabbing with the lighter color. So, you know, use what you have. I would have actually grabbed my wax pencils, except I have my huge stamp shelf is leaning up against my my place where I keep the my colored pencils, because we're doing some basement remodeling, and I had to take my stamp shelf down. So I've got like boxes of stamps I've been tripping over. And there we go. And of course, if you want to do any more in the grass, you can do that too with a pastel pencil. Now, I probably wouldn't even bother to fix this. I would be like, yeah, it's fine. But you know, it is a little smudgeable, so if you want, you can blast it with a little hairspray. It's not smudging that bad. Pastel pencils are not as soft and smudgy as like a stick of pastel or pan pastel, because they don't have, they're harder. They don't have as much softness to them. They have to be a certain amount of hardness, or they would just break apart in the casing. So, you know, you can do whatever you like. And I'm just filling in a little bit of this green into the bouquet a little bit, because there were some spaces that I thought were a little bit too not dense enough. So there's that. And now I'm going to grab my card base that I prepared. So all I did here, as I tore the paper down and I mounted it onto this that white card base that we prepared, and just glued it down. In this awkward area, I wrapped some hand-dyed seam binding around. So I just buy it white and color it to whatever color I need, using re-inkers or spray inks, or you know, whatever. I think I'm going to use a little bit of foam tape for this, and maybe add a button or two for an embellishment, and call it done. Okay, so I'm going to use some foam adhesive on the back. And I'm not using yellow ones today. I haven't run out, don't worry. I've just, I found these, and I wanted to use the sheet up because it was like half used. So I'm going to put that kind of right here. You can trap some of those little tails under this piece if you want to. It's completely up to you. If you have like a wayward one, you don't really like it hanging out there, then you can kind of just trap it under there. You can also like stick it under there later. I kind of like that because it kind of keeps my ribbon in place and it gives it a little bit of lift. And I like buttons, especially something like this. It's kind of like, it's kind of very ladylike. It's a very ladylike card, and if you don't like want to take the time to add string to your buttons, but you love that look, what you could do is just cut little slivers of your leftover pattern paper, because remember, we've got plenty left over from our from making our envelope. You know, maybe get a couple different colors and use that, because it's there, it's free, you know, it's not wasting anything, so you might as well put it to use. And these are actually vintage buttons. I save buttons from clothing before, if it's not good enough to donate and I'm gonna just like throw it in the rag bag, I'll clip the buttons and use them for projects like this, even if they're broken, because broken ones look kind of cool. They have more of a like vintage vibe to them. And then I'm just going to use any sort of thick glue. I got my hot glue gun ready to go right here, so I'm just going to use that. And there you have it, the finished card. It looks pretty on the inside, it looks pretty on the outside. It's a lot of fun to make, and you can use the supplies I used. I'll have them all linked up in the video description. You can find the stamps from pegstamps.com, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. They're our sponsor. Make sure you use the coupon code in the video description so you can save 10% on your order. And that goes for everything, the ink blending brushes, the ink pads, the stamps, everything you're gonna buy, and their prices are really reasonable to begin with. So I want to thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Until next time, happy crafting.